This is the Distinctly Detroit podcast, the only pod that explores why one wants to be in the D. I am your host, Fyodor III, the director of the University of Michigan Detroit Center. Join me as I interview students, scholars, leaders, and innovators about living, working, and loving in Detroit. Good day. Welcome back to the Distinctly Detroit podcast. On today's episode, we have Professor Lisa DuRussel. She earned her MLA from the University of Michigan in Landscape Architecture and her BS in Environmental Policy and Resource Ecology from the University of Michigan as well. After receiving her master's, she became an associate with Hoare Shout Landscape Architects, Inc. in Chicago for 4 years. Lisa then accepted her first leadership position as the senior landscape architect and project manager with Mathews Nielsen Landscape Architects in New York City for 3 years. Today, she is still in architecture and a senior landscape architect with Unknown Studio and an independent consultant. Lisa is also an assistant professor with the University of Michigan School for Environment and Sustainability. Please help me welcome the accomplished Lisa DuRussel. Welcome. Thank you very much for coming on the podcast today.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah.
I'm really excited to be here.
Great. So where are you from originally?
I'm originally from Manchester, Michigan.
Okay.
So about 20 miles southwest of Ann Arbor.
Okay.
Yeah, farming family.
Farming family.
Tiny town, 1,000 people.
Yeah. So a lot of the time, my experience is a lot of people who, Manchester's still in Washtenaw County?
It is.
Yeah, a lot of students in Washtenaw County have no interest or desire in going to U of M. What prompted you to decide to go to attend U of M?
Right, no interest. Well, my parents told me I had to go to college.
Okay.
And so when I applied for school, I only applied at MSU in Michigan because I knew I wanted to stay in state because it was cheaper. And Michigan just gave me a bunch of money. So I got some grants and I applied for I applied to the School of Engineering, did not get accepted. In my letter, I wrote that I was interested in the environment, and they were like, you should go into the School of Natural Resources. And I was like, well, okay. So I got admitted into there right away, and it was like the best happy accident that could have ever happened because it then opened me up to learning about nature and building on all the things that I did as a kid playing in the dirt, and then made me excited about landscape architecture, which I continued on for 7 years to get my undergrad and grad degree.
Okay. Now, I'm sorry, I asked my questions in wrong order. You did mention this. You grew up on a farm.
I did.
What kind of farm?
It was a potato farm.
A potato farm?
A potato farm, 1,200 acres. We actually initially started farming where Lakeside Mall used to be. Okay. And we got bought out by mall developers. And so my grandpa and his brother and their dad bought property out in Manchester. And so family moved from Utica all the way over there and took up shop growing potatoes.
Growing potatoes in Michigan. Now, I've never known Michigan.
Oh,
I hear about Idaho and potatoes.
Oh yeah.
How many tons of potatoes a year?
Oh gosh, I don't know. I don't know how many tons, but we grew about 400 acres, which was pretty significant. Round white potatoes. So we would take them over to the Eastern Market and sell them to all the restaurant tours and all the groceries. And so my cousin was at the Eastern Market every day in the middle of the night. We had a stall in Shed 5. And we also, we did all cash crops. So potatoes were the main thing, but we also had radishes and spinach, collards, turnip greens, mustard greens, dill, arugula. At one point we had strawberries. That was my first job, planting strawberries.
Okay.
Yeah.
So how many different ways can you prepare a potato? And
all
what's
the
your
ways.
favorite?
Oh my gosh, I can prepare potatoes any way. I think a potato belongs with every single meal. Great source of potassium. But my favorite is slicing them up, throwing them in some tin foil on a grill with like a little bit of oil and some rosemary, salt, pepper. Best way. 20 minutes each side.
Gonna have to try
delicious.
That. Roasted potato.
Roasted potatoes on a grill.
Okay. So, sorry about asking them in the wrong order. So you decided to go to U of M.
That's right.
You got your bachelor's from U of M.
Yep.
And then decided to stick around and get your master's.
I did.
So what's it like being a double alum?
It's pretty cool, especially now that I'm back here working in Michigan. it's like you never realize, how much clout, your degree carries, like I went and practiced in New York City for many years, and there's a lot of Michigan transplants. And what I find is that we all gravitate towards each other. And so all of my friends in New York City were actually from Michigan, which is crazy. But, I'm really happy to be back here in Michigan, back at my alma mater. I always knew I'd come back to Michigan. I thought I'd be practicing. So to kind of come back to the university in a very different light has been awesome, fulfilling, crazy at times because I started my job during the pandemic. But I don't know. I feel like with my double degree, it's like I'm a powerhouse. So heck.
But so you're from a small town.
Yep.
You went to college in Ann Arbor.
Yep.
You go out to the big cities of Chicago and New York, and now you're back in Detroit.
Yep.
So tell me, how would you say your experiences in Chicago and New York shape your experience here working in Detroit now?
Well, it's funny, when I graduated from graduate school, I knew I wanted to leave Michigan, but I didn't know where. And so I applied for jobs all over the country and ended up taking a job in Chicago because a lot of my friends were there. And what I didn't realize is how much I would enjoy living in a city, how much I would enjoy, especially in Chicago, being in a city that was filled with neighborhoods where I could get everything I needed in all one place. I could ride my bike to work. I could take public transit. I didn't need my car. There was always something to do, right? Yeah. And, after a while of living in a city, sometimes you just outgrow your place. And, I had a number of friends who had since moved to New York, and I was working on a lot of projects at Hershout that were very conceptual. And so we were working with big clients, arboretums and, universities, but everything was so conceptual and nothing got built. And so I was like, I really want to build things. And I had a friend who I'd work with relocate to New York, and he's like, come to New York. So I put on my resume, I put his address and basically went to New York with a Rubbermaid tote and said, I'm going to find a job. And I sent out my resume and my portfolio, and I was there for a week. And that following Monday, I had a job. Mm-hmm. And what was awesome is that really showed me how fast things can move, and how, New York is an overwhelming city. It is huge, but you tend to find your place, and there's always something to do. And what I loved about practicing there is I love the fact that, we're looking at interstitial spaces, looking at places that people wouldn't think about as being park space or being green space. And we were transforming them, and we were doing it so fast because it's very much like a service industry out there. The design world moves quick. And I lived there during Hurricane Irene and Hurricane Sandy. And it was amazing to see the amount of money coming from government to just come fund landscape projects. And so I was really lucky that I got a job with Mathews Nielsen, which was a female-owned firm, which was really important for me, as a young designer. And they built a lot of things, and I wanted to build stuff. I wanted to be on that construction side. Okay. And so I got to go out and have my big boots on, and I got to go out and select trees for big, huge park projects in the city. I got to, be out there to see streetscapes transformed. And, I would say now, kind of turning it back around, having that big city experience where things move fast, where you're able to kind of touch many different communities, work with people who are very different than you, work with, communities that really need support. It kind of really framed my job here and the work that I'm doing now in terms of working in Detroit and kind of working in kind of more urban, in the urban realm. It kind of helped me kind of learn what I like doing and what I didn't like doing in New York City. And now I can be here and I can try and change the way in which we practice, right? So, one of the things, I call myself a Lone Ranger, and I just like to kind of go and help where it's needed and, be there to provide, kind of design support when people need it. And I'm just kind of here to support people of the place. And so I'm lucky that my university job really allows me to do that. And I'm lucky that my practice has kind of come with me, and that I can, still do New York practice, but do that here, do it here geographically in Detroit. So I still get, to kind of rub shoulders with people who are, powerhouses in the profession. But, in a way, I kind of get to decide who I want to work with and how I want to work with them. And I find that it's just so much more collaborative here, and I love it. And this is exactly where I need to be and where I want to be.
Wonderful.
Yeah.
So what is it? Can you explain to us, our audience, what does a landscape architect do?
Oh my goodness, I sure can.
What's involved in landscape architecture?
So it's funny because people, immediately they're like, oh, you're a landscape architect, come look at my lawn. Or can you come look at my plant that's dying and tell me what to do with it? And granted, sometimes I do that, but a lot of the work that I like to do and that I've been involved with is very much larger scale. It's always in the public realm. It's always community driven, oftentimes from a grassroots level. And so I like to think that I know how to design with materials and plants on a site that then connects all of the disciplines. So you think about an architect designing a building, you think about a civil engineer putting in drainage, in a streetscape, you think about a structural engineer building walls. Well, I like to think that the landscape architect is the one who ties all of those things together, right? So you look outside the door and you see, a beautiful canvas made of soil or concrete or whatever it is. The landscape architect is the one who designed that. They're the ones who can thoughtfully craft and creatively craft our exterior space. And I think, especially during the pandemic, that became so much more important. I also call myself, I'm a landscape architect. I know a lot about materials. I know a lot about how things are put together in exterior spaces. I know a lot about plants, sure. But I also think that it's about strategy too, and trying to come up with projects that are going to be a catalyst for social action or for places of learning and education. And so, oftentimes when I'm thinking about ways in which we go about thinking of projects, we're oftentimes thinking about things piece by piece. And I like to come in and think about it a little bit more holistically. Like, how are we going to think about the system and not just the object or not just the thing that we're designing? And so I like to kind of think about it from like a larger kind of master planning, large scale, but then think about where we can make the most action, where we get the most bang for our buck in terms of what happens first. And a lot of my work at the university is related to kind of climate action, and that's kind of goes back to my work in New York City. And so that's one of the things that the students and I are always looking at is, how are we designing for tomorrow today? And how are we making sure that what we're installing and what we're putting in and what we're designing for is going to last legacy? How do we know it's going to last the next 100 years? And so in part, it's kind of being a little bit forward thinking, being a little bit crazy, pushing ideas that maybe people aren't used to yet, but putting it out there because you never know who's going to get excited about something. So
now, it's something you mentioned that stuck with me. I read a book once called Devil in the White City.
Yes, great book.
Great book, oddly enough, about a U of M alum who's a serial killer in Chicago. But it's also about the Chicago's World's Fair.
Yeah.
And what I learned in there about landscape architects is the vision, the ability, as you mentioned, being
Exactly.
forward thinking, seeing the future. But you can sometimes design a landscape that's not going to manifest for 5 years down the road. You need these trees to grow in, fill in, and these bushes. And to have that kind of foresight, I think is just amazing.
Yeah.
And I don't really have a question behind that. I just want to say,
I
think it's amazing to be able to look and say, this is what it's going to look like in 5 years. And then to have the patience to wait for it to manifest and come back and tell people, see, this is what we had in mind.
Exactly. I always tell people landscapes are dynamic things. They're always changing. They're always growing. And, that's something that, when landscape architects are kind of in conversation with architects, it's like people can visualize a building and they see it right away when it's built. But then, when you're thinking about everything that goes around it, you have to be able to see in like the third dimension to really understand that. And, that's why kind of the visual communication, of landscape becomes so important over time, and why we're starting to look at more digital tools to really show people what things might look like, 5, 10, 20 years in the future. Yeah. We need that buy-in. We need the buy-in now.
So I'm curious, you're Chicago, I understand the move from Chicago to New York. So what brought you back to Ann Arbor?
Yeah, I took a job in New York City at a firm called Westgate. Amazing firm, doing really forward-thinking work, really trying to push the boundaries of what landscape architecture is and can be. And I had been working on a project with them over the course of, 8 years, and it finally opened. And I was so excited because this was like my blood, sweat, and tears had been poured into this project in New York City. And it opened and it was like, aha, I did that. Check a big, box off the list of like amazing accomplishments that I never in my, lifetime thought I would ever kind of experience, right? Westate is one of those firms that I would say, as somebody from farm girl from rural Michigan, like you probably never thought that I would make it there. And somehow I did. So it was a big accomplishment for me. And, at that time, New York City was changing a little bit. A lot of the work was transitioning to more developer-led projects. And, ultimately, I, was kind of like thinking, well, if I were to stay here, then I really have to put roots down. We all know that New York's really expensive, right? I was like, if I'm going to put down roots, then I'm going to want to be here for a long time. Concurrently, at that time, 2018, 2019-ish, my mother got really ill and I was actually flying back to Michigan very frequently. At that point, I had taken a job teaching at Penn State. So I was still doing work in New York City, teaching at Penn State, got that position as a visiting practitioner in residence through a friend of mine who I'd worked with at Westate, and she had taken that position. And she's like, Lisa, you're so good in the office teaching all these younger staff and mentoring these entry-level professionals. She's like, you would be really good at teaching. And I was like, what? I don't know. I'm not sure. And so I went out there and I gave a guest lecture and they were like, you need to come here. And so I applied for the job and I got it. And, was kind of doing a little bit of back and forth, ended up moving there, stayed there for a couple of years. But, as I mentioned, my mother had gotten ill and she had cancer and I was spending a lot of time back here in Michigan. And so at one point I just said, hey, I knew that Michigan is the place where I wanted to be. All of my family is still here. I knew that great work was coming into Michigan. You see a lot of New York firms starting to do work here. Centennial Park, for example, designed by Michael Van Valkenburg out of New York, Brooklyn. It's in construction or starting construction now. Snowhead is doing work here on the Ford Design Center and on the old Amtrak building. And so we're seeing like a lot of really cool stuff here. And so I was like, ooh, I could make a place here. And so I got really lucky, in that year that I moved back. It was 2019. I bought a little house and was like, hey, this can be my project. And my mother ultimately did pass away. And, at that moment, I was like, this is really nice being home. And it's really nice being here. And so I chose to stay. And I didn't know what I was going to do. And I like to say I manifested this job at the University of Michigan, which was a professor of practice job, because I knew in my heart and soul, I always wanted to practice. I always wanted to be somebody who's building things, who's coming up with ideas. I didn't know that I wasn't fully on board with just being a researcher and just kind of researching ideas. I wanted to do things that were actionable. And so I like to joke around that I manifested this position as a professor of practice within the School for Environment and Sustainability. And I was really surprised when I was asked to interview, and then I got it, and they offered me the job during COVID. It was the first months of COVID, and I started teaching in a COVID year, all remote, from my little home studio in my house that was now under full renovation. My dad and I decided to gut renovate. And so it just all happened very serendipitously. I knew I'd always wanted to come back, but I assumed that I'd go work at a firm in Detroit and that I would do that. But, come to find, living in a bunch of different places, you make a lot of friends and, they still wanted to work with me. So I'm really lucky that I'm able to collaborate with Unknown Studio out of Baltimore. They're doing a lot of really cool climate mitigation work. They're doing a lot of botanical gardens, doing, a lot of like really cool forward-thinking climate stuff. And so I still get to collaborate with them on work. I'm collaborating with OSD on this project I was talking about earlier, the Shepherd, which is going to be a really fabulous park, art space, sculpture park, skate park, all this kind of good stuff over in East Village, so just off Jefferson and Parkview. And so that's going to open up here and hopefully the next month. And so really excited to still be able to collaborate with a number of people that I know from my kind of past experiences to really continue to do really good work here on the ground, especially in Detroit.
Okay. So, We're glad to have you back.
Yeah, well, thanks. I'm happy to be here.
Just a couple questions before we transition to our lightning round. And this is one just having a conversation earlier in the studio here before you came in. AI is all over the place.
Oh my
Chat
gosh.
GBT, all these different things. I've read several times that architects or the field of architecture is one that's on the line because of AI. How do you see AI impacting your field?
Oh, I think it's going to impact it pretty greatly. And I'm trying to close my eyes to it a bit. No, I think that it's very valuable. It's a very valuable tool. And I think, as a designer in the field, we have to have all of the tools in our toolbox that we can hold, as long as our toolbox doesn't get too heavy. Or maybe it can, we just then get something to carry it with, right? But in part, I am a pretty analog person. I love drawing. I love sketching. I love getting out the pad of paper and pencils to really allow, kind of like ideas to flourish. And so while I love AI and I love the idea of, being able to kind of situate ourselves in potentially a future landscape with, the VR goggles or whatever it is, there's still, in my mind, something that's so important about just being able to pull out a pen and a piece of paper and just sketch. And so that is a really important part of my practice, is just being able to draw things and to learn about scale and all of that. But I tell you what, we're doing more and more with AI, especially, as we're coming up with renderings, as we're starting to visualize landscape. We're doing so much more with, not directly related to AI, but doing more with like drone photography and understanding digital tools. I'm about to embark on a project where we're trying to democratize digital tools so that way, we're at the university, we have access to a lot of really cool stuff. But when you're out in a community, like say here in Detroit, you want to be able to share that knowledge with community members, but not have it be so out of this world that like nobody can afford it or nobody knows how to use it. So we're trying to find ways to kind of use more open source tools and technologies. And so kind of like in that same vein of like experimenting with digital tools and whatnot, I feel like AIs and VR is kind of in that same bucket. So I think that there's a place for it, and I think that it's going to become more prevalent. I think it makes our job a little bit more difficult, but the capabilities of it are kind of cool, pretty fascinating. Okay. So we'll see. Like, I don't know. Like, again, I have not fully embraced it, but I'm not opposed to it.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay. But yeah, so we'll see.
That's cool. Well, positive endorsement from someone in the field is helpful. You've recently been awarded a grant to do some work in the city of Detroit, seminars, activities. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Of course, yes. I am collaborating with Tanya Stevens, who is the founder of Detroit Vacant Land. And we have collaborated on a proposal called the Detroit Land Lab, which is really focused on land acquisition and trying to put land back in the hands of Detroiters. And so we know a lot of people are already doing this. I know T at Keep Growing Detroit is doing this. Tons of organizations are already doing this. And so what we're doing is we've crafted a project that is in collaboration with Detroit Month of Design. And we're going to be running a series of workshops that bring together all of these people who are already doing it. Tanya has recently purchased about 5 vacant lots through the land bank over in McDougal Hunt. And she is turning it into basically a creative space where people can come practice art or play music. And so, we're here to kind of show people that it's possible. It's possible to get property from the land bank. In our work, we're going to have our first workshop in September. And after that, we're just going to continue doing, basically meet people where they are and do a series of traveling tables and do a series of what we're calling technical office hours to, again, put tools and skills in the hands of residents. So then that way, when we do talk about, getting property from the land bank, when you have to file a site plan or you have to draw a site plan, you then know how to do it or you know where to go to get that done. And so a lot of it is centered around creative placemaking. This project I'm really excited about because it builds on some of the work I've been doing with Bailey Park and DC and the McDougal Hunt community association, the neighborhood association over there, where we've been looking at soils and doing a lot of citizen science style testing and information gathering. And so we're really excited to kind of build on that too, again, to just really kind of convey some really easy techniques for how somebody can start to look at their space or look at vacant property around them to say, okay, let us test the soil. Let us see what trees are there. What kind of fauna do we see? What kinds of bugs are crawling around? And, we're hoping that we can start to map out some of these things. And we've bought a drone, so we're hoping to do some drone mapping and to kind of show the before and after. And
U of M's drone. I hope you read U of M's drone policy.
I know.
I bought a drone for the center. I had to give it back because
you just couldn't do it.
Just the policy is ridiculous.
See, I'm putting it in my the nonprofit's hands. So
okay.
So Tanya's gonna get it, and I'm just gonna be there for it.
Okay. Well, no, that sounds really exciting.
Yeah, we're really excited about it.
And I've met Tanya before. She's really cool people, so that's good work. So we're going to transition to what we call our lightning round. And the lightning round is we ask every guest these same series of questions. They're more about your engagement around the city of Detroit and your interaction with the city. Okay. And the first question is, what's your coney order?
Oh my gosh, well, it's going to be a coney dog, extra onion. Pile on that coney sauce. Give me 2 of them.
All right. Okay. Who is your favorite Detroit athlete?
Al Kaline, Mr. Tiger.
Verner's or Canada Dry?
Verner's, hands down.
Okay. Better Made or Lay's chips?
Better Made.
Deep dish or pan style pizza?
Pan style, you mean like Detroit style?
Yeah.
Six slice? Oh, yes. That, hands down.
Yeah.
Detroit style.
Okay. Favorite Motown artist?
Diana Ross. Supremes.
Yep. Favorite place to go in the city?
I love Belle Isle.
Favorite Detroit sports team?
Tigers.
Okay. And where can we find you?
Right now, I'm in the East Village on a construction site. When I'm taking a break, I'm over at Spotlight getting one of their house lattes over ice. Delicious. Cairo coffee. Put a plug in for them. So good. Or I'm around the city looking at art, going over to Louis Buell, checking out all the tons of art galleries we have, any kind of live music. Love live music. So I'm always out checking out a DJ or some kind of emo band or something like that.
Are you on social media?
I am on social media, yes. You can find me at Lisa DuRussel, just my name. I'm on Instagram. I'm on Twitter. I'm on Facebook. I am not on TikTok, although my students, I think, wish I was. So maybe that'll be my goal for the next semester. I don't know. We'll see.
Okay. Well, there you have it, ladies and gentlemen. Professor Lisa DuRussel, University of Michigan, double graduate, master's and undergrad, doing work here in Detroit on landscape, helping turn our empty lots into usable, accessible spaces for the residents. And we're very glad to have you on board. Thank you very much for coming on.
Thank you so much. This has been great.
All right. And ladies and gentlemen, this is the Distinctly Detroit podcast. You can get us anywhere you get your pods. Please like, subscribe, and rate. And we'll see you next time. Thank you. This has been the Distinctly Detroit podcast. This is a production of the University of Michigan Detroit Center. You can find us anywhere you get your pods. Please like, subscribe, and rate us. This podcast is executive produced by Marlon Franklin, edited by Aranza Stanton, and written by Shaylin Jones and Fyodor Ship III.